Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. This is phase 2, share out of the Educational Facility Master Plan process for U46. And Dr. Jeff King with the U46 will give us an introduction into tonight's presentation and hand it over to us to get started tonight.
Thank you, Carrie. I want to thank everybody that's attending again tonight as we continue with DLR Group and presenting to this particular group of people and other groups as well as to the work that they've been performing for almost the past year. As I mentioned in our previous meeting, some of that had been slowed down due to what we've all been going through, but we continue to attempt to proceed with this in hopes that we can finish it later in this year. With that, I'll turn it over to Carrie and she'll go over what has been happening in phase 2 and where we're going with this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Before we get started tonight, what I'd like to do is introduce our team that is here tonight. One of our team members had a last minute emergency, so she is unable to attend, but Rachel will be with us in spirit. We also have with us Melissa. She is an educational planner with a background in interior design. Grace is our GIS data analyst. Troy is an educational planner, but also an urban planner. And Corey is an architect and an urban planner. And I am Carrie Van Sant. I'm a project manager and architect and K-12 leader in our Chicago office. So welcome and thank you for being with us tonight. We're looking forward to sharing our findings from phase 2. Our learning objectives tonight, similar to the webinar we hosted a couple weeks ago, we have some key takeaways for tonight and why I want to discuss why it's important. So our learning objectives, we'll learn about what's changed in teaching and learning and why that change in pedagogy has prompted a need for change in space. We'll understand what success means for U46 and students that might be on different pathways after leaving high school. And we'll realize how visioning information will be carried forward and used in the decision-making process for recommendation of a holistic master plan. So why are these important? We want you as the community to be informed throughout the process. So we provided a share out of phase 1 findings, kind of our data-driven findings a couple of weeks ago. And you can find that information on the district website under plans and priorities. And visioning workshops in general as part of this phase and the activities that we have within them really help us to understand where the district and the community and different partner groups see and envision the district moving in the future, and really what those cultural shifts are, the shifts in education, in order to be able to make informed decisions about facilities and about educational program needs so that we can align the space needs with the educational program and other defined needs within the district. So before we go too far, just a note and a reminder for those that joined at the last webinar, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. But please note that tonight you can submit questions via the chat feature, but we will, only panelists will see those, and we won't be doing live Q&A tonight. Also, there's an opportunity to ask, submit questions online via the district's Let's Talk portal. So you can access Let's Talk as shown in step 1, and then select Educational Facility Master Plan in step 2. And then you should see this window on the right for step 3 for you to be able to submit your questions specific to content that you see tonight or general questions related to the Educational Facility Master Plan process. So our agenda tonight will be to take a look at the where this share out fits within the overall master planning process, roles and responsibilities. So those partner groups within the district and the community that have participated in the visioning workshops. And then talking about where the district is now to build on that foundation of success with educational programming, but also looking at how education is changing and what the student of the future, what their learning needs might be like, and connecting that with what are those space changes that may be necessary to be able to accommodate the future learners. Also defining what success looks like in the district by different partner groups. And then we'll circle back around and talk about what's next in the process. So before we get started, we do have a poll for tonight. This is one Zoom poll that we have. And then we will have a quick kind of Menti survey exercise partway through the presentation. If you have any particular issues submitting a response to the poll, please note that you can submit your response via the chat window. This is similar to like if we were in person and asked a show of hands to understand who the audience is so that we can have a better understanding of who you all are and who we're presenting to. So I'll go ahead and open the polls. Please note that the first two questions are kind of a partial question. Unfortunately, our Zoom platform only allows for 10 response options. So in question one, which is part one, you'll see some communities that are available to select if you reside in those. And in part two, you'll see the other half of those. In part one, if you don't live in any of those communities, please select the last item that says not listed and move to part two options. And then if you happen to live outside of any of those communities, that option is listed in part two. Please note that you do have to submit a response for all questions in order to move on and submit all of your responses. So I'll go ahead and open the questions. And then in the third question, we ask you, when did you attend high school? And within that list of responses, you'll see variations between those that may haven't entered high school yet, if we happen to have some young students with us tonight, all the way up to those that may have had a different experience or graduated over 40 years ago. So we're just trying to gauge and understand which or who has how long ago you might have been in school. And then we also ask you questions about your learning, what you recall from your learning spaces when you were younger and what you remember most about your educational experience. And then the last question we have relates to the types of tools and technology you might remember from your educational experience. So we'll leave this open and until I see looks like a lot of people are moving through the questions. Let's see here. Got about half of the people that have voted, so we'll wait just a moment longer, make sure we capture as much of your feedback as possible. And again, if you are having any problems with the Zoom poll, if it's just not functioning for you or you're struggling, please feel free to enter your response to us in the chat function, and our panelists will note that. We have about 2/3 of the audience that have voted, so nearly there. Make sure you've placed a response. You've selected a response for all questions. Again, number one, if you do not reside in one of those communities, please select the last option. And in number two, if you answered in question number one, please make sure you provide your selection as the last item as such. And then as long as you provide a response to all questions, you should be able to submit. But again, if you have any issues, please go ahead and submit them in the chat. All right, we are just about there. I'm going to close the poll in just a few more seconds. All right. So now I'll go ahead and share the results. So tonight, in which community do you live between questions 1 and 2? It looks like we have a large showing of community members from both Elgin and Bartlett. We also see that majority of you tonight in attendance graduated or attended school between 21 and 30 years ago. And it looks like we do have some a participant that hasn't quite entered high school yet. So it's nice to see that range in different ages here tonight. And what do you remember most about your learning space, whether it was a school, classroom, your home, if you had an alternative experience to school itself? This was a multiple choice option. It looks like majority of the responses were around school identity and murals and decor. Also, the blackboards or marker boards that the teachers and students use in this space. Also, lockers is up there as one of the most remembered parts of your space. What do you remember most about your educational experience? This one, this is exciting to see. Amazing teachers and mentors. That's wonderful. I love that that's number one. Hanging out with friends, yes. Socialization, all part of going through school and building that network of friends and developing your social emotional health and well-being. And then what types of tools and technology do you remember from your educational experience? Many people responded to papers and pencils, as well as overhead projectors. And I can relate to both of those. And then computer labs. We do have some that do recall those floppy disks and giant computers. And so that is our results for tonight. I appreciate you all taking time to respond to those. And we will go on to the next set of slides. All right. All right, so educational facility master planning. What exactly does that mean? We will explain that. We did do an introduction and a little bit more overview of the process in part 1. So please look for that webinar recording on the district's website and go ahead and dive into that. You can watch it in snippets if it's too long to watch in one sitting, and that will go over in more detail the process. Tonight, we're going to share where these visioning sessions landed within the master plan process rather than go into a lot of detail. So this is a quote that's often attributed to John Dewey. And essentially the takeaway is teaching in spaces to support such should really reflect how our students are learning. And they should also reflect the world in which they will emerge into. So we know, even this past year has showed us that this world is rapidly changing. It's connected differently, it's adapting, it's evolving to a number of different things that are happening to us on a daily basis. So our spaces, our schools really need to adapt to the modern and future learner. So as we hit on for phase 1, a traditional facility master plan, many years back leading up to now, traditional master plans were just looking at the nuts and bolts of a facility, structure, systems, conditions, trying to establish a way to be proactive and get in front of anticipated maintenance rather than being reactive to those issues as they come up. While we also look at that, DLR Group looks at educational facility master plans and examining the educational adequacy of spaces today to meet needs today, but also the educational readiness for spaces to meet curriculum needs into the future. So ultimately, this is to provide a holistic approach that ensures lasting value, not only to those teachers and students that are using those spaces on a daily basis, but that you as vested community stakeholders that are using those spaces or interacting with schools, et cetera. So the ultimate goal is to align the form of your spaces to the function rather than trying to make a space work for what you need. Our partner teams that we coordinated with throughout phase 2 are primary users. So we call this group our experts because they are educators, administrators, teachers, staff and students, right? They are in these spaces outside of our current climate with the pandemic, day in and day out, all day long. So they really can give us the best firsthand feedback on how these spaces are being used, what teachers are trying to teach and how they're trying to teach it, and how students are learning or want to learn. So again, this is a 6-phase process. This share out is for phase 2. So it's where we've had an opportunity to discover and explore what is possible, what might be changing in the district, what does teaching and learning look like in the future, and how do we roll with those changes? How do we adapt with those changes? Some key activities that you'll see tonight that we went over include outcomes from our student ideation workshops, our values workshops, really looking at user experience and sustainability goals, curriculum and instruction workshops with teachers and staff, as well as a community visioning workshop, which leads us here to tonight's session. So And to kick us off, Melissa is going to talk about our foundation for success, understanding feedback from our workshops on where the district is now.
Thanks, Carrie. So first, I'm going to give a little plug. So if you weren't able to attend the phase 1 share, I encourage you to revisit that. That presentation is recorded and it's on the U46 website, and it's packed full of info. And you can see sort of we're using some of that as we move forward into this phase and on into the next one. So I'm gonna plug that. So as we transition from phase 1 to phase 2 and the curriculum and instruction workshops, we took the opportunity to reflect on what we learned from all of that data and begin to look forward toward a vision of what the future may be for teaching and learning and facilities at U46 in order to build this foundation for success. So that's building on what your district does well and beginning to anticipate challenges and opportunities for the future. So to do this, we conducted a SWOT analysis as part of those curriculum and instruction workshops. We wanted to get feedback from the participants at each cohort level, reflecting on what they feel about the current state of teaching and learning at U46 and about the future state of teaching and learning at U46. We offered some thought starters and we received some really diverse and fantastic responses, and we sorted these over a SWOT chart. So SWOT, you can go back one slide. Thank you. SWOT is an acronym for strengths, weaknesses or challenges, opportunities, and threats or concerns. Strengths are what are you already doing well? Weaknesses or challenges are what could be better. Opportunities are sort of asking the question, wouldn't it be great if blank? You know, what do we perceive as future opportunities? Threats or concerns are, I'm kind of worried about blank. What might get in the way of successful implementation? Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot summary of the responses across all 3 cohorts, all 3 curriculum and instruction workshops that we held. We're highlighting some of the key points from each category. You can see there's 2 boxes in each of these sort of 4 corners of this chart. We split them into 2 groups, those items relating to the district as a whole and things relating more to the EFMP or facilities. I am not going to read all of the content on this page to you, but I would like to touch on a few items that show up across several corners of this SWOT chart. The first is curriculum delivery. It's identified as a strength, especially vertical articulation, which is the district's approach to ensure an aligned and continuous learning plan for students as they move from grade to grade. But curriculum also appears as a challenge, you can see. And that was in terms of the continuity and expectations between different schools, and as well as the time it takes for new curricula to be implemented. So you can see that falls as both a strength and a challenge. Recognition and support for social and emotional learning too is seen as a strength, but also appears on the right as a challenge when looking at how it's integrated into the day-to-day practice and activities. On the challenges side, you can see that the relevance and responsiveness of professional development was identified as a challenge. There were some feelings that it's a missed opportunity for collaboration, or that the material doesn't relate to what they're doing in the classroom, which leads to a potential opportunity in the bottom left. The opportunity for collaborative and teacher-led professional development, where teachers become the experts on a particular topic and teach their colleagues within their own school and at other buildings. We can also we can build on existing strengths and make them into future opportunities. One of these is the variety of student interests and passions. We can build on that by providing flexible and adaptable spaces and furniture, and even more, a mix of spaces and programs that helps you lose some of the rigidity around program boundaries and perhaps encourage intersections between student interests. This potential opportunity, it also addresses the challenge of inflexible classroom spaces that's up in the top right corner. Building on another strength is play-based and hands-on educational delivery in the strengths category. That there's those two items are there because it kind of depends what age group you're talking about, whether it's play-based or hands-on. And you can see that built as an opportunity below in project-based learning spaces that might encourage student exploration throughout all cohort levels. One last item you'll see is related to equity, and it shows up, you'll see under challenges, concerns, and opportunities. There were comments about equitable access to resources, programs, and diverse course offerings, and how that varies depending on which building someone attends and the space that's available there. This is a huge opportunity for improvement. So you'll see it actually occurs in all four of these squares. So with this, we've shifted our perspective a little bit from the present to the future considerations within U46. And next, Carrie is going to talk to us about the future of learning at a broader scale.
Carrie, you're muted. Did it again. Inevitable.
Someone has to do it.
Thank you. So what do students need for, to follow their pathways, preparing students for success? The next series of slides will take a look into some of the things that our young learners are, going to be confronted with or are being confronted with. So meet Gen Alpha. This is sometimes used interchangeably with Generation Z, and this refers specifically to those born after 2010. According to some articles, there are approximately 2.5 million members of this generation born each week. And although birth rates have slowed, keep in mind that by 2025, that's more than potentially 2 billion Gen Alphas that we really need to take a look at how they're learning, the tools they're using, and the activities that they need to thrive in their school setting. So take a moment to take this in. 85% of jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't even been invented yet. And this is taken from the next era of human and machine partnerships. So Institute for Future and Dell Technologies, that was a study that was done in 2017. That's a lot. That's 85%. That's a lot. I mean, it's unfathomable because we don't know what those changes are, but we know technology is rapidly changing the way that we do things day in and day out. Just look at this past year where most everybody has gone virtual for a number of tasks, right? Just something to think about in the back of your mind. And part and parcel to that, the pace of change in 2030 will be so rapid that people will learn in the moment. So their technologies will be new, and we're already seeing that. We're already seeing augmented reality. We're seeing virtual reality. We're seeing robots do what people have done in the past. So the ability to gain that new knowledge may very well be more valuable than the knowledge itself. That ability to task switch and change and develop and redevelop are all important skills. I'll share this video with you now. So that is meant to just, take a moment to think about where our students are at, right? What they're learning, the pace of, the rate of change and the pace of things as we move throughout the future. And it's exciting, but it's also a little scary, right? Because there's a lot of unknowns out there. But how are we preparing our students for these changes and adaptability? We do have a question for you all. So I'm going to pause now. This is an interactive option for you to be able to participate in a Menti survey. Melissa's going to share that online so that we can see your feedback. And then it's just what you saw there. What changes have you experienced in the last year? So if you go to menti.com at the top, and I believe that one of our panelists is going to put that in the chat window as well. There we go. Corey's on it. Go ahead and click on that link in the chat or type it into a browser or your phone if you have it next to you. And then there's a code that you need to input, and that'll take you to this question. What changes have you experienced in the last year? I know I've experienced a number of different changes, and so I can only imagine what all of you have gone through, whether it be work, home life, balancing this, that, or the other, school, changes in how you're learning, how you're teaching, how you're working, being in a Zoom meeting all the time. Yeah, seeing some feedback there. So we again, if you're not able to get the link, you can put it in, type it into your browser, www.menti.com, or type it in on your phone, on your smartphone if you have one of those.
You can also submit your responses into the chat here in Zoom, and one of our panelists here will enter it into Menti for you, so it'll appear on the screen with all the rest of the responses. So feel free, those responses only come to us.
Yes, now we're starting to see it populate. I can empathize with so many of these items. Being remote, feeling isolated, sanitizer, hand sanitizer everywhere. Yes. Zoom meetings. Yes. And those of you that might see an item on there that you really connect with, feel free to duplicate it. Duplicated answers, those get larger, and so they really pop. Yeah, they show the connections that you all have as participants tonight. Yeah, massive uses of technology, going virtual, the difficulties, the challenges, but also the opportunities in having that ability to have technology when you might not have had it before.
I also see both sides of a lot of different items here. I see seeing more families, spending more time with family, and also not being able to see family. There's less time with friends, but maybe more time with family. There's a lot of different sides of the very similar experience that we're having.
Yeah, absolutely. I've gotten to spend more time with my immediate family and my young boys, but definitely feeling isolated from my extended family. So I can empathize with both. All right. We'll go ahead and close the poll now. If you do have additional thoughts or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat window, and we will record those. Thank you everyone for participating, and I appreciate you doing that. I'm going to share my screen here again. All right. So the pandemic, what have we seen with the pandemic? We over the summer issued a survey across the nation. So we are a national and international firm, and we did survey teachers and administrators across the nation. And in that survey, we found that respondents a number of a large percentage, 60% of those respondents wants to see an increase in technology access and its use, even in a post-COVID-19 educational environment. So it has, in many cases, the pandemic has spurred that movement to blended or more virtual learning. But we're seeing, it won't go away. If anything, it has spurred us farther faster, right? So, and it hasn't just changed. The COVID hasn't shifted the big picture of the trends. It's just changed the ones that are priorities, right? So blended learning, which I'll talk about here, is more of a focus, and it's a big topic at many state level meetings also, and integrated blended learning into curriculum. And how can, the big question is how can we get technology to students for many districts? And I know U46 went through that about a year ago, right? Is how do we get technology to all of our students in a rapid pace? And how can we get educators to have the professional development that they need and the support that they need to teach in a hybrid model, right? And more virtual setting. So inquiry-based learning. This is really focused on the student-centered, and spaces that support inquiry-based learning are spaces that help and support glimpses into educational activities related to design and discover, wonderment, exploration, and also the ability to research and define goals and then reflect on that process, right? So there's a mix of different activities that go with inquiry-based learning. And then SEL, so that is short for social emotional learning. And as many of you may be able to empathize, especially with those feelings in isolation, social emotional well-being and development is critical, especially with our young learners. And we take a step back as part of making sure we have SEL for short integrated into our curriculum and into our space types within the school, so that students feel supported, so that all students that might have different learning methods or different learning needs are supported, not only for social skills, but to build that public spirit and to create their own identity and their own agency, or their ability to choose, to define kind of their paths and the way that they learn best. Planning becomes more natural, and it doesn't have to be a purposeful event. You can have teachers that integrate, and you can have separate spaces for them to feel supported, and you can have similar spaces for students as well, where they can interact in a social setting, but also find time to break away and take deeper dives or reflect or be on their own and take time to refresh. So mapping learning activities. Corey's going to talk to us about what students might need as they leave the district and explore their potential pathways.
Thanks, Carrie. So we've heard a lot about change tonight, and we want to walk you through how our team, in partnership with those from your district, create a vision of what this change might look like and what that means for the future of schools and students. And this really starts with understanding what students need to do in school so that they can follow the pathway to their future adult life. So for the purposes of looking at students and what they might need in the future, we use student pathways as a way to build empathy with students that are going to school 10 years in the future. And so we worked with teachers and students to look at what a future might look like for a student who's headed to college or university, specifically with traits around being a high academic achiever with maybe higher levels of anxiety around achieving A pluses or high grades in school. And also someone who's driven to succeed, but really needs support and guidance to understand what it might take to get to college or university level. The second pathway that we worked with was related to students who are starting directly into the workforce following their high school graduation. Whether it was entering a family business or graduating with a certification in trade, we wanted to make sure that we were thinking about what these students would need as they transition into any sort of work after they leave U46. And then the third path is sort of a catch-all. This is a path for students who might have a bit of a unique spin on what they want to do after school. Could be anyone who desires to be an entrepreneur or do freelance work, or even for students who are interested in a gap year in a service program. And as a way to talk about and think about what students need in order to succeed on those pathways, we like to use different learning activities. So instead of thinking about your typical curriculum or classwork like math, English, gym, science, we try to use learning activities to think about what learning might look like in the future. And so these different activities all have different space needs, whether it's related to furniture or group sizes or equipment, or even how students are interacting with one another. And so you can see a variety of different activities. We've mentioned hands-on learning a little bit. So this is anything where you're building, experimenting, really using a lot of space to learn. That would be quite different from a space requirement than something like focused study, which is when a student might be taking a test or reading on their own or really trying to focus. That might require quieter space or a smaller surface space or something that in a location that shouldn't be disrupted. Go to the next one. Great. So as a way to develop a baseline for understanding how students are spending their time today in learning activities, we issued a survey to staff throughout the schools back in the fall in September, and we had them respond to try and understand what the snapshot of learning looked like in each of these activities so that we could then compare that to what the future might look like in the district. This is an example of early childhood. So we are not just looking at elementary, middle, and high. We also want to understand how students are learning in early childhood programs. We know it's a big part of the district. And so we want to understand how that differs, but also what those space requirements might be in the future as well. So here you're seeing an example of the data that was collected. And I think this is a pretty obvious one. Most students in an early childhood program in school district U46 are spending their time in hands-on learning, about 23% of their day. You also see practicing autonomy, which is letting them make their own choices, learning how to make choices or how to spend their time is the second biggest category at about 18% of their time. And then the next example is a snapshot from high school. So we do collect the data at all cohort levels, and that will be available on the district website after this presentation. But we wanted to take two examples to show you tonight. And you can see the high school example is has a little bit more variety and similar spread throughout the activities, which makes sense because by the time a student gets to high school, we want them to be able to be doing all of these different types of activities rather well, because these are the activities that are going to help them succeed on their pathways. You can still see that hands-on learning is a larger percentage of the day, but not quite as large as we saw at early childhood. And so this data was collected from 139 different responses at the high school cohort throughout the district. So understanding how students are learning today, which is what those pie charts just showed us, and then we start to transition and think about what types of spaces, programs, or activities are going to best support students in the future. And so as a way to do that, we take 3 different personas that students in U46 middle and high school actually helped us develop. And we create characteristics around these future students. So we have Madison, Matilda, and Cinder Tyson here, and they're each on a different path. Madison wants to be a dancer. So she's going to take more of a unique path. She likes learning by standing at tables with classmates or sitting in those nooks under her desks. And she struggles with focused study and really learns best through hands-on activities. Matilda is the persona on a pathway to college. She tends to be smart, focused, and funny, and she knows she's wanted to be a doctor when she grows up. And she's known this for a while. And with being a doctor comes higher education, going to college, going to university in some form in order to be a doctor. And Matilda really likes collaborating with others, flexible spaces, independent work and choice, but also has a little bit of that anxiety we talked about at the beginning and self-doubts and has trouble working under stress. And then our last persona is Cinder Tyson. He wants to be a woodworker, so going straight into the workforce after he leaves U46 high school. He's very creative, loves being outdoors, and thrives with hands-on learning. He also really likes being in familiar spaces, so trying to keep consistency throughout his day. And then on the next slide, we will see a summary of what came to light for how these students might learn in the future. We saw a lot of response around student choice and making sure that there are adequate mental and physical breaks throughout the day. One of the repeating themes for all students at all cohort levels, because we tested these personas in future learning scenarios at the different cohort levels. So we did this with elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, early childhood teachers, and high school teachers. And we discovered that learning is truly about the process and not about the outcome. So how can we create environments that support that process? We also saw a lot of project-based learning life cycles. And what this means is that instead of going to math and going to English, going to science and going to gym class, the day of the student or the week of the student is focused around a project. So for instance, maybe it's building a bookshelf for someone like Cinder Tyson. He uses his math lessons to figure out the dimensions of the bookshelf. And then he uses science class to study the materials that he's going to use in the bookshelf. So everything becomes about the project. We also saw quite a few themes around teacher as a resource facilitator and guide. So no longer standing at the front of the room and directing students on what they're learning, but serving more as a resource and guiding the students through these project-based learning cycles. There was a lot about technology and flexibility and learning space as well, which seems to be a continuous theme when we think about the future of teaching and learning in the district. And so this was looking, so what we just saw was really focused on individual students, smaller groups of students, what's happening in the classroom. So now we're going to take a look at what broader cultural shifts might be occurring or what the vision is for the future for the district. So really what we're looking at here is some responses from those same teachers and students who helped us develop what those days might look like for students 10 years in the future. And this chart indicates where those participants feel they are today in the district and where they want to go in the future. So to break this down, you'll see a blue dot on one end. And so we have word pairs. You can see traditional, innovative on opposite sides. There's no good word, there's no bad word. It's just a spectrum. And so what we were trying to figure out is where do people within U46 feel they are today versus where they want to go. So the blue dot indicates where they feel they are today or where the district is today. And then the orange arrow indicates where they would like the district to go in the future. And then overlaying the blue and the orange, you see green and purple, which was student responses. So we didn't ask students all of the same words, but we did ask a few of the words to get their opinions on where they would like to see learning go in the future. Some of the biggest gaps between current and future are boxed out on your right-hand side. So one of the biggest ones was moving from more singular space types to having more variety of space type. The second largest gap was moving from more of an instructor-led model to one that is student-led, whether that's space or curriculum or teaching. There was a desire to move towards more student-led. And the third is moving from a rigid schedule to something along the lines of more flexible time management. And we didn't put definitions to these. These were self-defined by those who were responding. So it could respond to space, it could respond to actual day, time, whatnot, but this was left a little bit open-ended so that we could really get a sort of a good picture without putting too much framework to it. And then the last one that I think was the biggest gap of all was moving from institutional to inspirational.
All right, so now we're going to take a look at, we just took a look at some of the changes, that we're seeing in education and that shift to more project-based learning, more inquiry-based learning. So what does that mean for spaces and how have spaces evolved over time? So research is showing us that spaces are shifting, right? Shifting in types and sizes and transparencies and access and adjacencies. So on the far left, you see what are defined as more traditional spaces or kind of cells and bells classrooms. You have classrooms on either side of a hallway, and maybe you have some small group or some resource spaces mixed in. On the far right hand side of that spectrum, you start to see more of an open plan learning space. So you have your classroom is dissected down, and you have it's more activity based. So you have a larger collaborative or more commons area, and then you have smaller defined spaces depending on the different activities. Now, in this particular study, it was found that the respondents had the highest response rate in function and engagement in model D, actually, which is more of a blended response. So we can, like I said, we'll provide more information on the website for you to take a deeper dive into some of these studies and research findings. FINS is DLR Group's framework. So FINS stands for flexibility, individualization, naturalness, nature, and stimulation. And FINS is our educational research framework. It includes not only survey responses and a look at our research on student and teacher engagement within the built environment. So how spaces are impacting the engagement of both students and teachers. It also looks at neuroscience and research in environmental psychology. And it helps us to pull together all of those resources and understand the principles and design strategies to create spaces to best support teaching and learning, the different activities that we've discussed previously. So we talked about blended learning prior, and what could this look like, right, in a school setting? Here you've got a commons area. So in the one diagram, it would be kind of that red space, right, that shared space that is straddled on both sides with different types of classrooms and with different transparency. So students can be monitored by teachers that might be conducting an activity with a larger class, with those students that might need to break out into a setting and work on different types of technology and with a small group setting or on their own, depending on the type of task that they're working on. Inquiry-based learning, being able to have that ability to come together, work together in a large group setting for discussion and reflection, but also having that hands-on project-based space. So labs or large open areas where projects can be spread out. Oftentimes we see this happening in hallways, right? Or we see the students laying on the floor, or just not enough room because of the sheer number of equipment or furniture pieces that might be in the space to be able to do the project effectively. When we talk about social and emotional supports and the spaces that will support that, we look at things that help invoke feeling and secure and engagement and spaces where there can be focused study, there can be classroom interaction, but also those spaces where students can break away and explore and socialize and work together. Oh, I got a frozen screen here. Hold on a second. Oh no.
I feel like this type
One moment.
of format helps
It popped up
students
a video
get ready for the real world and like communication.
Okay, pardon me. There was a link embedded in there that caught me by surprise. So let me pick back up where we were. All right. Thank you for your patience. All right. We also see these settings. Corey, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Thank you. So this is a setting in a middle school where on the right-hand side, we actually have the capability of creating a full classroom, right? And then the silver partitions or glass doors that you see in the middle are actually operable. So they move to enclose the space and then create a small group space. So the key to this is creating dynamic, variable, flexible spaces where different activities can occur and students can feel secured and safe and still be monitored by teachers and be able to participate in different activities and socialize and work together. So how do the different space types, how can we get as much flexibility out of them so that you can conduct those classroom activities, but also have these small group or project areas and breakout spaces adjacent to them? Public spirit. many times, or some, one of the key things that came out of your responses from the poll earlier was, your memories of murals and decor, or maybe lack thereof, right? In some cases, some buildings can be very institutional. So all of that is part of our memories and our recollection of our experience in school. So how do we create a dynamic space that has a lot of spirit and where a place where students and teachers want to come, they want to learn, they want to teach, they want to engage. Also using that building as a teaching tool, and using the materials to be an educational component of that space, where students can identify where they might be in a building just by a particular zone that they might be in, that is defined and themed, with color and graphic and different murals and materials. And also taking a look at how we can provide those spaces that give students flexibility to continue building and creating their own identity, but gives them the choice to be able to select where they want to learn and when they want to learn. And part of that is dependent also on what it is they're doing, the activities they might be doing, whether they're in full class or breaking out and working in small groups or on their own. But how do we create spaces where students can feel more connected physically and through relationships? So Troy is going to talk to us about some of the activity responses and feedback that we got related to how do we define success for this master plan with different partner groups.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Good evening, everyone. As Carrie just stated, I'm going to talk a little bit about an exercise that we conducted, which was designed to help us understand how success is defined for students, for the community, and for teachers. And we looked at into the future. Fortunately, I don't have to go through and explain Menti, because my colleague Melissa did an exercise earlier in this session where she went through this. But we looked at it in terms of students, and just remember, we asked participants to look 10 to 15 years into the future, and what would a successful student look like? And just to give you some understanding of how this works, the bigger the word appears, that means it was repeated more than once. It was repeated numerous times. And the bigger it is, the more people responded with that same word. And if you look at that, you look at compassion, growth, pride, belonging, confidence. Some of those words appear much larger. But also, as I looked at all the words that are embedded into this image, there's also some words that I would say there's some themes. There's some central themes that is reflected in this word grouping. And if I was to just pick out a couple, and it's really how the program works. There were some individuals who spell a knowledge two different ways. So it appeared as two different words. But then there are words that are very similar, like happy and happiness. So if you combine some of the words that are central themes are very similar, that some of these would be much bigger. But this gives you an idea of how your community, both inside the district and outside the broader community, look to define success for students into the future. We also had them respond to a second question and say, how do you define success for the community in the future? And some of the more common reoccurring words reflect around partnership and equity and pride, belonging, team. And here again there were some words that may have only appeared once or maybe twice, but there are some themes associated with those words that if they were combined, it will make them much larger, like some of the largest words that you see. And a lot of those commonalities, just kind of going through this real quickly, dealt with culturally appropriate or culturally connected. So those were some of the reoccurring words, and there were other themes that we saw in the community. And the final kind of view or look activity that we did around this question that we asked around this activity is, how do you find success for teachers? And a lot of the words that appear for teachers also appeared for students. So there was a connection between the learning environment itself, where there's some similar kinds of measurements for success. And here are some of the more common and repeated words: focus on growth and collaboration, collaborative, seamless, supported. But there's also some of the common themes in all the words, and that are in some in much smaller letters, was around connection and connected, student-centered, student-first. So this is just a kind of quick review of some of the things that your community associate with success as we look 10 to 15 years into the future.
Thanks, Troy. So, speaking of looking into the future, I see that there's some people who participated in this workshop that are on this call, so that's really great. But we also wanted to consider not just the long-term goals of the district as a whole, but how those goals were incorporating sustainability, and specifically sustainability as it impacts the user experience. So we conducted this workshop with various stakeholders from across the district called Values, which stands for Viewing Architecture Through the Lens of User Experience and Sustainability. And the goal of this is really to help people understand how sustainable design solutions impact the way users are actually interacting with and experiencing the spaces in the district. So we had students and alumni participating, people from business operations, teachers, and business and community partners. And the activity included 4 segments, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more coming up. So the first activity we did was just to ask people from all of these different stakeholder groups, what are your group's big picture needs, goals, and challenges and aspirations related to sustainability and the user experience? So we just had people think about what is the student experience? What is the teacher experience? What is the experience for business partners? And some of the themes that came out of this were that career pathways were really important, and that could be a potential opportunity to think about incorporating sustainability related career pathways into the district. Other things that came up were the generation of renewable energy, improving communication around the way the school practices things related to sustainability, making sure that students actually have a voice in the decision-making process, making sure that everyone knows what to do with their waste and their recycling, and that there's a better system in place, and then creating a healthy indoor environment. So some of that stuff was talked about in the phase 1 share of ways that's being measured and potential interventions for that. And then updating furniture across the district so that it can last a long time and that we don't have to continue to replace it. And the second activity that we did was we asked all of the participants to think 10 years into the future, if this master plan is completely successful in accomplishing its goals, what would that reality look like? And what we heard was that students would feel really empowered to become advocates for sustainability and for global change. So they would be out in the world making an impact on these issues. The district would be net zero, which means that it is only using as much energy and producing as much waste as it can produce itself. So there's no extra energy being consumed and there's no extra waste being generated. And career pathways, we heard that students would be gaining professional experience and training in sustainability related fields, as I mentioned before. And that we also heard that in this ideal future, there would be a way for schools to support the community through agriculture and to create educational pathways around nutrition and community health and farm to table. And finally, that there would be a collaborative decision-making process where students would actually be involved in deciding what types of things they would be learning and making sustainability decisions for the district. And finally, in the last activity that we did, we asked each group to go through a variety of topics to narrow down what would be the most important to their user group. And so we came to a common set of priorities about goals that the district can have and think about moving forward in this master planning process. So the main things that came out of this exercise were community exchange. So what that means is that schools can really be a conduit for facilitating community connections and partnerships and creating a sense of community belonging. So activating the community and also providing the community with access to things that they need. Another major theme was environmental awareness. And this was especially important, obviously, because this is a school district and there's the opportunity to actually build a foundation of environmental knowledge across the things that students are learning to inspire them towards action in sustainability related issues. And resiliency, so that basically means ensuring that if there's any sort of unexpected event, that could be a disaster, an economic downturn, a stressor in someone's personal life, that U46 schools can be there to support students and communities as they try to cope with these unexpected things. And the schools can still provide their primary functions no matter what is happening. And then finally, sustainable food sourcing and waste. So we talked a lot about the connection between nutrition and food and growing your own food and where you get your food and how that impacts the waste that's generated. So thinking about that synergy going forward. And then, so to zoom out from this a little bit, we touched on this in the last share out for those who were able to attend, but we really wanted to think beyond the walls of a building or a school to how does the school fit into a broader community and that community's systems, and what does it really mean for a community to be healthy, and what role can a school play in helping a community achieve that? So to think about this issue, we turned to this framework, which is called the Social Determinants of Health. It was developed by the Kaiser Family Foundation, and it basically outlines the aspects of a person or community's existence that impact their health outcomes. So in order for someone to have really positive health outcomes, they need to, these are all the things that could impact it. So economic stability, neighborhood and physical environment, so stuff like housing, transportation, parks, education, which is something that this district can really impact, food, community and social context, and healthcare systems. And we really we had examined some of these issues from a bird's eye view using data that we had available, but we really thought that it was important to hear from a cross-section of the community about what was really going on and what their experience was. So that led us to conduct this community visioning workshop to understand current community conditions, define people's aspirations for their community's future, and then think about how U46 schools can play a role in actually achieving that vision. So for this workshop, we had a wide variety of people. We had community partner organizations, so people who ran libraries, early learning centers, local government and public entities, just residents of the community, parent and advisory groups, so people from, those groups, students and alumni, and also representatives from the district. So throughout this exercise, we asked people to think about who was at the table and whose perspectives were or were not represented, what was going on in their communities, and then how a school could help them achieve those goals. And what came out of this is just a very broad overview of this exercise, but what came out in each of these themes was some sort of high priority challenge or opportunity that the community felt it was possible for schools to address. And these are the things that rose to the top. So for mobility and food access, it was brought to our attention that people who have limited access to public transportation in some areas of the district make them more vulnerable to food deserts and to food vulnerability. And that's something that we also heard the district is addressing through its provision of food to families. And then we also heard a cry for more mental health support, more support to training parents in how to help their children navigate district technology and support their children's educations, employment and childcare. So the way that people's ability to access early childhood education and care affects their ability to maintain their jobs, and also the importance of increasing representation, inclusion of, and communication with non-English speaking families in the district.
Thanks, Grace. So it's a great summary from the team tonight of a number of different workshops and activities and topics, whether it be from curriculum and instruction to sustainability and how the experience of the user and how the district and its schools can play a large part in as a role in the community. What's next, right? So we're in phase 2 of the process. In the latter phases, in phases 3 and 4, we begin to work with a steering committee. So we take what we have learned about what's currently occurring and happening in phase 1. So a number of those pieces that we shared at the last webinar a couple of weeks ago. We take what we've learned and explored in phase 2 and the educational vision, the cultural shifts that have come out of these visioning sessions. And then we can better understand where there may be gaps, right? Whether it's in access to programs, access to buildings, accessibility, space types, flexibility, equity and parity in those space types across the districts. And we take a look at where there are gaps, where, what's working, what's not, where are the needs. And then we work alongside the steering committee to conceptualize what changes might be necessary to be able to achieve the educational vision that we're striving for, those cultural shifts that have been identified. And so it'll come in the form of high-level conceptual district-wide recommendations on what the facilities might look like, how they might need to change to be able to adapt to these shifts in culture and curriculum. And then as we move towards the later stages of the plan, the steering committee will create a recommendation based on different options. And those options will be a point in time where they'll be shared out with the community to provide feedback. So later on in the process, look for opportunities to be able to weigh in on some of the options that the steering committee puts together as a master plan strategies for the next 10 to 15 years for the district. And then that eventually the goal is to have that be recommended to the Board of Education for adoption and implementation. Time frame, all of that stuff, what goes into those options, those are all identified along in the process. So none of that is known at this time. Again, if you have questions, please take the last bit of time here to enter them into the chat. Also know that you can go to Let's Talk and select Educational Facility Master Plan, the button here in step 2. And then once you get there, you should see the screen on the right to be able to input what's on your mind and ask your questions in that manner. And that's all we have tonight. We appreciate your participation. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We hope you had some great takeaways from the educational visioning sessions that we had in phase 2 as we're discovering and exploring where the district wants to go and take teaching and learning and the cultural shifts at some of the cohort levels. Again, we will have information available for a deeper dive. This was just high level summary share out. So please look to the plans section on U46's website to be able to take a deeper dive into some of the materials that we discussed tonight. All right. That's all we have. Thanks, everyone, and have a great evening. We appreciate your time.